Who are you? Who am I? How do we define our identity? How complex is a person's identity? Is identity single or dual? These are fascinating questions that philosophers, psychologists, and novelists have wrestled with for many years. And then there's the question of the double. How would you react if you ever met a person who looked and sounded exactly like you? This is something that has been explored many times in literature, movies, and television. Sometimes in the form of twins, perhaps separated at birth, and sometimes without any rational explanation offered. In today's episode, we will talk about a mediocre civil servant who meets his double, a man who looks exactly like him, but despite external appearances, their personalities are the exact opposite. The double, or doppelganger, is better at everything that the original struggles with. What is going on? A Little Russian novel explores the impact of mental illness on a man's identity. The Double, subtitled A Petersburg Poem, is a novella by the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky. It was first published on January 30th, 1846, in a literary magazine which was mostly read by the Russian intelligentsia. The Double was Dostoevsky's first novella, and it came out in the same year as his first long novel entitled Poor Folk. Later, Dostoevsky revised The Double and republished it in 1866. There are different translations of The Double available in English. The version translated by Richard Pevear and Larissa Volokhonsky is available on Vintage Classics in a volume that also includes The Gambler. You can also buy The Double on its own, translated by Hugh Alpin and available on Alma Classics, or Constance Garnett's translation available on Borgo Press. As usual, you will find links to the books in the show notes for this video. If you buy any books using my links, you will be supporting my work because I will receive a small commission, but it will not cost you any extra. In his novella The Double, Fyodor Dostoevsky tells the story of a low-level bureaucrat from the Russian city of St. Petersburg in the 19th century. The name of this sorry creature is Yakov Petrovich Golyatkin. Golyatkin is under a lot of pressure at work, and his personal life is not any better. He's what we would now call a loser. But Golyatkin is not well mentally. It is clear from the beginning of the book that he is paranoid. One evening following an embarrassing episode at a party, he meets his double for the first time. From that moment on, encounters with his double will be multiplied. Golyatkin's double, although physically identical to him, is everything he is not. The double is a much better version of Golyatkin. Gradually, Golyatkin's mental health deteriorates until he descends into complete insanity. Yakov Petrovich Golyatkin is a low-level bureaucrat. He works as what was then known as a titular counselor. You see, in Imperial Russia, there was something called the Table of Ranks, a list of different positions and ranks detailing every military, government, and court job. The Table of Ranks was introduced by the Tsar Peter the Great in 1722 and was finally abolished by the Bolsheviks in November 1917. According to the Table of Ranks, a titular counselor like Golyatkin would have occupied rank 9. Now, considering that there were only 14 ranks, 9 is quite a low rank. Golyatkin's doctor fears that the counselor is going insane, deeming his behavior antisocial. The doctor prescribes Golyatkin to go out more and surround himself with cheerful company. The problem is that Golyatkin is not very popular, which has led him to think that he has many enemies. That very evening, his office manager's daughter Clara Olsuyevna is celebrating her birthday with a big party. Although he was not invited to the event, Golyatkin decides to attend following his doctor's orders. At first, they don't let him in, but somehow he manages to sneak in, and once inside, hides in a closet. He finally decides to stop hiding and goes straight for his boss and Clara. Poor old Golyatkin is so nervous that he speaks incoherently and has to be escorted out of the party by 2 servants. He then runs off until he reaches a canal. Then he sees his double for the first time, a man who is exactly like him in every external way, to the point that he even wears similar clothes. Both men don't speak to each other then, because Golyatkin runs home before the encounter can take place properly. But it is not long until both men meet again. At first, they even become friends. But when Golyatkin realizes that his double is better than him in every possible way, the humiliation is just too much for him, and the 2 men become antagonists. You can skip ahead now to the next section if you do not want to hear how the novella ends. So after meeting his double, Golyatkin begins to have nightmares, and it is hard to tell how much of the rest of the story happens in his head. Golyatkin keeps seeing his double. Is this paranoia? Is this schizophrenic behavior? One day, Golyatkin sees his double entering the house of old Sufi Ivanovich, Clara's father. Later, Golyatkin finds a letter from Clara in his apartment in which she apparently beseeches him to meet her outside her house at 2 a.m. So at the agreed time, Golyatkin is waiting outside the house expecting a sign from Clara. He then sees people inside the house staring at him from a window. His double comes out and asks Golyatkin to join them inside. Once in the house, Golyatkin is surprised to find that everyone is warm and welcoming. But things are not as they seem. Among the people in the house is a doctor who is waiting to take Golyatkin to a mental asylum. The novella ends with Golyatkin being brought to the carriage that will take him to the asylum. The double can be read in different ways. A supernatural reading about a man who meets his doppelganger is possible. You can also read it as a tale of a schizophrenic character who is convinced that there is a conspiracy against him. And because we see everything from Golyatkin's point of view, it's also easy to empathize with him and believe that he is indeed the subject of a conspiracy. Only that doesn't make much sense, because who would plot against such a low-ranking official, and why? Golyatkin never stops for a second to consider that. Instead, his behavior is increasingly erratic. Everything he says and does makes little sense. If we are inclined to believe him, it's only because we only see things from his point of view. But if we step out a bit and consider how we would react to a character like Golyatkin in real life, perhaps we would start to see him as someone who would be a nightmare to work with. I do prefer to read The Double as an exploration of identity and the effects that social and work pressures can have on an individual. The social world in The Double is ruled by strict norms, and the characters that inhabit such a world are heavily repressed. Golyatkin is pretentious, extravagant, and incompetent. His double is his complete opposite in all those ways. Which of the 2 men do you think would fit in better in society? Well, obviously the double. Many elements of this novella, not least its grotesqueness and possible supernatural elements, remind us of the writing of the Ukrainian writer Nikolai Gogol. The Double shares many elements with Gogol's story The Overcoat. Some critics see The Double as an imitation of Gogol's story, while others have seen it as a parody or even an innovation on it. So, if you like the sound of The Double, but prefer more straightforward supernatural tales, I would recommend The Overcoat by Gogol, which is also one of the best short stories I have ever read. But the following applies to both stories, Dostoevsky's and Gogol's. I do not think most of us need to be a low-ranking public servant in 19th century Russia, or St. Petersburg specifically, to understand social pressure or how the way we live and the expectations placed upon us can be stifling and take a heavy toll. Is The Double a good place to start reading Dostoevsky? Well, it depends. If you would like to read something by Dostoevsky but feel daunted by the prospect of reading his big philosophical novels like The Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment, The Double may be a good place to start because it is a relatively short and undemanding novel. Just know that Dostoevsky is capable of a lot more than he shows in The Double. Remember that it was one of the first things he ever wrote, and even literary geniuses must start somewhere. But don't get me wrong, I did enjoy The Double. I just expected to have more fun and was left feeling slightly cold at the end. So I give The Double by Fyodor Dostoevsky 3 out of 5 stars.